every day. Attempts to delay negotiation only make their position weaker. You are demonstrating your resolve and determination, not through symbolic gestures, but by administering real pain. You do not continue to advance in order to grab land or possessions, but to put yourself in the strongest possible position and win the war. Once you have forced them to settle, you have room to make concessions and give back some of what you've taken. In the process, you might even seem nice and conciliatory. Sometimes in life, you will find yourself holding the weak hand, the hand without any real leverage. At those times, it is even more important to keep advancing. By demonstrating strength and resolve and maintaining the pressure, you cover up your weaknesses and gain footholds that will let you manufacture leverage for yourself. In June 1940, shortly after the German blitzkrieg had destroyed France's defenses and the French government had surrendered, General Charles de Gaulle fled to England. He hoped to establish himself there as the leader of Free France, the legitimate government in exile, as opposed to the German-dominated Vichy government that now ruled much of the country. The odds were stacked heavily against de Gaulle. He had never been a high-profile figure within France. Many better-known French soldiers and politicians could claim the role he wanted. He had no leverage to make the Allies recognize him as the leader of Free France, and without their recognition, he would be powerless. From the beginning, de Gaulle ignored the odds and presented himself to one and all as the only man who could save France after its disgraceful surrender. He broadcast stirring speeches to France over the radio. He toured England and the United States, making a show of his sense of purpose, casting himself as a kind of latter-day Joan of Arc. He made important contacts within the French resistance. Winston Churchill admired de Gaulle, but often found him unbearably arrogant. And Franklin Roosevelt despised him. Time and again, the two leaders tried to persuade him to accept shared control of Free France. But his response was always the same. He would not compromise. He would not accept anything less than sole leadership. In negotiating sessions, he was downright rude, to the point where he would sometimes walk out, making it clear that for him, it was all or nothing. Churchill and Roosevelt cursed de Gaulle's name, ruining the day they had let him take any position at all. They even talked about demoting him and forcing him out of the picture. But they always backed down, and in the end they gave him what he wanted. To do otherwise would mean a public scandal in delicate times and would disrupt their relations with the French underground. They would be demoting a man whom much of the public had come to revere. Understand, if you are weak and ask for little, little is what you will get. But if you act strong, making firm, even outrageous demands, you will create the opposite impression. People will think that your confidence must be based on something real. You will earn respect, which in turn will translate into leverage. Once you are able to establish yourself in a stronger position, you can take this further by refusing to compromise, making it clear that you are willing to walk away from the table, an effective form of coercion. The other side may call your bluff, but you make sure there's a price to pay for this. Bad publicity, for instance. And if in the end you do compromise a little, it will still be a lot less than the compromises they would have forced on you if they could. The great British diplomat and writer Harold Nicolson believed there were two kinds of negotiators, warriors and shopkeepers. Warriors use negotiations as a way to gain time and a stronger position. Shopkeepers operate on the principle that it is more important to establish trust, to moderate each side's demands, and come to a mutually satisfying settlement. Whether in diplomacy or in business, the problem arises when shopkeepers assume they are dealing with another shopkeeper, only to find they are facing a warrior. It would be helpful to know beforehand which kind of negotiator you face. The difficulty is that skillful warriors will make themselves masters of disguise. At first, they will seem sincere and friendly, then will reveal their warrior nature when it is too late. In resolving a conflict with an enemy you do not know well, it is always best to protect yourself by playing the warrior yourself. Negotiate while advancing. There will always be time to back off and fix things if you go too far. But if you fall prey to a warrior, you will be unable to recoup anything. In a world in which there are more and more warriors, you must be willing to wield the sword as well, even if you are a shopkeeper at heart. Reversal. In negotiation, as in war, you must not let yourself get carried away. There is a danger in advancing too far, talking too much, to the point where you create an embittered enemy who will work for revenge. So it was after World War I with the Allies, who imposed such harsh conditions on Germany in negotiating the peace that they arguably laid the foundations for World War II. A century earlier, on the other hand, when Metternich negotiated, it was always his goal to prevent the other side from feeling wronged. Your purpose in any settlement you negotiate is never to satisfy greed or to punish the other side, but to secure your own interests. In the long run, a punitive settlement will only win you insecurity. Here are further reflections on the diplomatic war strategy. From A World Restored by Henry Kissinger. Lord Aberdeen, the British ambassador to Austria, proved even easier to deal with. Only 29 years old, barely able to speak French, he was not a match for a diplomat of Metternich's subtlety. His stiffness and self-confidence only played into Metternich's hands. Metternich is extremely attentive to Lord Aberdeen, reported Cathcart. The results were not long delayed. Metternich had once described the diplomat's task as the art of seeming a dupe without being one, and he practiced it to the fullest on the high-minded Aberdeen. "Do not think Metternich such a formidable personage," Aberdeen wrote to Castlereagh. "Living with him at all times, is it possible I should not know him? If indeed he were the most subtle of mankind, he might certainly impose on one little used to deceive, but this is not his character. He is, I repeat it to you, not a very clever man. He is vain, but he is to be trusted." For his mixture of condescension and gullibility, Aberdeen earned himself Metternich's sarcastic epithet as the dear simpleton of diplomacy. From The Greek Myths by Robert Graves. In gratitude for his acquittal, Orestes dedicated an altar to warlike Athena. But the Erinyes threatened, if the judgments were not reversed, to let fall a drop of their own heart's blood which would bring barrenness upon the soil, blight the crops, and destroy all the offspring of Athens. Athena nevertheless soothed their anger by flattery. Acknowledging them to be far wiser than herself, she suggested that they should take up residence in a grotto at Athens, where they would gather such throngs of worshippers as they could never hope to find elsewhere. Hearth altars proper to underworld deities should be theirs, as well as sober sacrifices, torchlight libations, first fruits offered after the consummation of marriage or the birth of children, and even seats in the Erechtheum. If they accepted this invitation, she would decree that no house where worship was withheld from them might prosper. But they, in return, must undertake to invoke fair winds for her ships, fertility for her land, and fruitful marriages for her people. Also rooting out the impious, so that she might see fit to grant Athens victory in war. The Erinyes, after a short deliberation, graciously agreed to these proposals. Chapter 20.